My name is Burnett. Currently, I'm the National Freestyle Coach for the United States. During my coaching career, I've put together a comprehensive technique syllabus. Although this technique syllabus doesn't cover every aspect of wrestling, and certainly doesn't cover all the techniques that are involved in wrestling, I feel it does cover the basic skills and key techniques that are essential in the development of any athlete. USA Wrestling has now put this technique syllabus on videotape. I sincerely believe that this video series can benefit any club, coach, or athlete. We wish you nothing but the best in your quest for I feel basic skills are the most important aspect of wrestling. It's the foundation for all techniques. Oftentimes, wrestlers just want to learn technique. They want to see a move and then try to copy that move. But basic skills are the key elements and the mechanics of how each technique works. You need to work and build on the basic skills before you can go to the technique. I've identified 12 basic skills that I feel are essential in winning technique. The first basic skill is stance or position. That's the most important thing in wrestling. And there's two key points about a person's stance and position. First, it has to be comfortable for you. Second, you have to be relaxed in a stance. You have to be comfortable in it, because that's where matches are won and lost. On all levels, what wrestlers are trying to do is get their opponent out of position, create an angle so they can score. To do that, they have to get a wrestler out of position. So the most important thing in wrestling, and the first skill, is position. There's two types of stance. A square stance, where my feet are equal. I want my feet shoulder width, I want my head up, I want my back straight, and I want my elbows in and my palms slightly pointed down. I'm on the balls of my feet. I'm not on my heels. I don't want any space. Square stance from the side. I don't want any space so you can see under my toes. I want that wrestler slightly leaning forward. I want my shoulders in line with my knees. This is a square stance here. A couple things about a square stance. Anytime you see a wrestler in a square stance, keep in mind that for me to do an offensive move, I have to get my opponent coming to me or leaning on me. That's the only way that I can get in a position where I can score.
Let's look at this square stance in a live or real wrestling situation. Weight is slightly forward on the balls of the toes. Feet are approximately shoulder width apart. Shoulder over the knee. Back straight. Head up. Elbows are in and palms are slightly down. Notice that blue is working primarily from a square stance and he's forcing red to move into him. This is essential if he wants to set up an offensive technique from a square stance. He needs to have his opponent moving into him or leaning on him.
The second stance is a staggered stance, where I have one foot in front of the other. Again, my elbows are in, my head is up, my back is straight, and my palms are slightly pointed down. And again, I'm on my toes, the balls of my feet, my shoulders stay in line with my knees in this position. As you can see, when I turn just a little bit, I'm now in a square stance. When I turn back, I'm in a staggered stance. In this position, this staggered stance, which some people call a drop step, I'm already in position to penetrate to my opponent. So anytime you see a wrestler that stays in this stance, he's ready to penetrate more quickly. His motion will go forward and back way easier than it can go sideways.
Let's take a look at this staggered stance and some live action footage with Olympic and world champion John Smith. Notice John's in a very low position, weight forward on the balls of his toe, shoulder, knee, toe all in line. Back straight, head up. Elbows are in and the palms slightly down. Here's another example with Olympic silver medalist and world champion Zeke Jones. Once again, notice his feet are about shoulder width or slightly greater apart. Shoulder, knee in line. Elbows in where they can protect. Palms slightly down, head up, back straight. From here, he's able to move in both a backward and forward motion quite freely, and notice how he uses a drop step to set up penetration on a single leg takedown.
So again, the two stance, square stance, feet shoulder width, head up, back straight, elbows in this position is mainly for defense and lateral motion. Second, the staggered stance in this position is mainly for offense. I can move forward and backwards way easier than I can move laterally. Which brings us to our second skill, which is motion. Anytime I'm in position, I have to get to my opponent, or if my opponent's coming to me, I have to try to create an angle on him. So I have to have motion. Out of a square stance, anytime I move, anytime I'm in position here, and anytime I need to create motion, I want to take short, choppy steps. And some basic rules to remember. When one foot moves, my other foot moves. I don't move one and then try to move the other. When I move one foot, the other one moves. So I'm constantly in good position, which is the most important thing in wrestling. Keep in mind, when I move here, I'm not picking my feet up. I'm doing shuffle steps. I move my feet 4 to 6 inches. Another basic rule. When my hands move, my feet move. So that I'm constantly staying in good position so that anytime I stop, it's the same as when I start the match. Anytime I have motion in this position here, whether I'm circling, moving laterally, or moving back, my feet are shoulder width, my head is up, and my back is straight. Right? I don't pick my feet up, I shuffle, move 4 to 6 inches at a time. Now in a staggered stance, in this position, it's the same. If I'm going to move forward here, short, choppy steps. When my hands move, my feet move. When I move one foot, I immediately move the other. Don't leave them so you get overextended. Right? Those are the two basic skills that we start with in wrestling. Position's 1, motion is 2.
Here we see lateral motion from a square stance. As they tie up, we begin to see some circular motion and off balancing. again circular motion to stay square with the opponent. Red moves into a staggered stance, square stance, moving both forward and laterally. Blue switches to a staggered stance, drops in on a takedown. Red is in a square, is able to defend. Here we see an example of forward and backward motion, slight lateral direction to it from a staggered stance. Another example here.
The third basic skill that we're going to talk about today is changing levels. So we've had position, the most important skill, we've had motion, and now we're going to change levels. For me to get to my opponent and penetrate to my opponent, I have to stay in good position and at the same time change levels. When I change levels, I'm going to change levels at my hips. I'm going to change levels here. All the time that I'm changing levels, I stay in good position. So that anytime I freeze in this position right here, my feet are shoulder width, my head is up, and my back is straight. You'll see a lot of wrestlers at times that appear not to be in real good position. But that's because there's a distance between him and his opponent. If you watch all the good wrestlers, the closer they get to their opponent, the better position and the better stance they're in. So when I change levels and I move towards my opponent, when I'm moving in and I'm going to change levels, I stay in good position. I believe in the concept of position of a high hand and a low hand. I always protect my lead leg. So anytime I change levels, I'm coming down, but I'm always protecting my lead leg and one hand up in here. My elbows are still in. I can be here. That's not that bad. When I change levels, but I'm changing levels at the hips. So if I had my partner and we're in this position right here and he's in good stance and I'm going to change levels, all I'm going to do is concentrate before my attack, change levels here, but to stay in good position.
Here's a slow motion example of this level change within a stance. Again at normal speed. Here's an example of a level change to a low-level single shot by John Smith. Watch Kenny's level change to a double leg takedown. Not only does he change levels going down, but he changes levels again coming up as he sets up a finish on the double. Again at normal speed.
The fourth basic skill in wrestling is penetration. I have to be able to get to my opponent. And you've got to keep in mind when I do this, when I penetrate, I stay in good position. Before I can ever penetrate, I have to change levels, I have to have motion, and when I do this, I have to stay in good position. If I don't stay in good position, it gives my opponent an opportunity to score. Actually, there's three types of penetrations. One, there's a drop step or a step in. I call those two penetrations the same. And anytime I penetrate in those two situations, I'm going to use what I call an inside step. And the reason I do that is very simple. If my opponent is stationary or moving away from me, I have to take my body to him. So I have to be able to travel. And when I do that, I'm going to pound, step, and now I'm going to drive over my knee, staying in good position the whole time, but I'm going to act like there's glass on the mat. I want a reaction like there's glass on the mat, right here. And as soon as this knee touches the mat, it's going to come up. Now, as soon as I drive off of this back leg, it's done all the work it's going to do. The next part of the work for this leg is to be up here so I can cut an angle. It immediately comes up and I'm across here. All right? So my inside step is a pound, step. When I drive over, it's going to hit broken glass on the mat. It wants to come up immediately, and this trail leg comes up immediately in this position. Don't stay down there. Always try to come up. So the first step is an inside step, keeping in mind that my opponent is stationary or he's moving away from me, and I have to get to him. So pound, step, drive, leg comes up immediately, and I'm in good position again. Watch what I do with my opponent here. When I do this and I do an inside step, actually there's 5 places on my opponent that I could step to. I could step here, 4 to 5 inches to the outside, 4 to 5 inches to the inside, directly in the middle, 4 to 5 inches here, or 4 or 5 inches here. Those are the only places that I should really step to on my attack. I don't want to step too far. I want to step about toe to toe. But those are the 5 areas that I can attack with my penetration. When I talk about an inside step, what I'm going to do is step to my opponent and I can pound, step, and drive, or I can just step in. I can just step in. Some wrestlers don't like to pound, step, and drive. They feel like they're giving themselves away to their opponent. So they use what they call a step in. But the steps are still the same. All right? So you have to keep in mind that I'm going to inside step here. Okay, on this penetration step where I'm using an inside step, I'm going to step to my opponent, and it's very important for me to start to get an angle on my opponent. Remember, if he's stationary or moving away from me, I have to get to him. Right? So from this position, I'm going to pound, step, toe-to-toe, knee drives, and now I'm going to follow up here into this position. The best place to finish is up on your feet. It's going to make it easier for me to score there. So that's what I want to drill. When I drill that position, I want to be able to go through and up to my feet and be in good position right away. If my partner is backing up a little bit and I go to him, I have to travel to here. If he continues to back up, I still come up into good position here so that I'm in good position.
Here's an example of an inside penetration step on this double leg takedown. Again at normal speed. Here's another example with world and Olympic champion Kevin Jackson of the United States. As he changes to a right leg forward staggered stance, he drops in on this inside penetration step for his double leg. As he comes back up, he immediately has to drive forward again to pursue his opponent for the takedown. Again at normal speed.
The second type of penetration step is an outside step. Keep in mind, for me to use an outside step, my opponent has to be coming towards me or leaning on me. And here's the reason I don't use an outside step for all my techniques. If he's stationary or moving back, and say I'm in a double bicep tie-up right here, and I wanted to hit a duck under or maybe a high crotch, and I tried to outside step here. From this position right here, if he were to continue to move away and snap me down, I'll end up in this position. That's not good position. As you can see, it makes it real easy for him to post me. But watch what happens if I push on him a little bit and I get him to lean into me and I hit my duck under. If I'm pushing on him and he's leaning at all, when I outside step here, his momentum, his penetration actually comes to me. And that's the motion that I have to have. If he's stationary and moving away, I inside step because I have to get to him. But if I'm in a square stance and I want to use an outside step, I have to have motion into me. He's either got to be pushing into me or he's got to be leaning on me. Again, if I outside step and he's moving away from me, this is the situation that occurs. Wrestler gets out of position, he's easily snapped down and easily scored on. So when you teach your wrestlers these two basic skills, remember on the penetration, you pound, step, drive, that's an inside step. But if I want to use an outside step, which is a great step, make sure that your opponent's coming into you.
World champion and Olympic medalist Chris Campbell uses an outside step to set up his head inside single. Again at normal speed. From elbow control, with his opponent moving into him as he begins to lean, Chris uses an outside step to set up this duck under. Again at normal speed. Here we see a single again set up with an outside step. Again at normal speed.
The third type of penetration is an outside step with a knee spin. And the reason I add this in here into the penetration step is real important. Very simply, I have a basic rule that I learned from another coach at one time that says, backside is best. And very simply, all it means is this. If I'm in front of my opponent here, and even if I'm in good position, and I feel pretty comfortable here, he's got a lot of counters. He can sprawl, he can whizzer, he's got some hooks, he's got some trips, a lot of different techniques that he can do. That if I'm behind him, right here, now he's got some counters he can do, but far less than what he can do if I stay in front. So the basic concept of backside is best. But for me to get to the backside, I have to work on that step. And I call that step a knee spin. And very simply, all I'm going to do is this. It's an outside step. And if I outside step, what's my opponent have to do? He has to lean on me, or he has to be pushing into me. Right? So when I outside step and I do this knee spin, it's an outside step. Here. When I do that, my knee is going to go down in front and spins till I go to the backside. So with no partner, it's like this. I'm going to outside step, knee's going to go down, and I'm going to turn to the back side. Again, the other way, it's an outside step, knee's going to go down, and I'm going to turn here, in this position. So if I'm facing the other way, outside step, turn, and go to the back side.
We're going to look at a variety of single leg takedowns with Tim Vanny and Joe Gonzalez utilizing this outside step knee spin technique. Notice in all cases the individual is either leaning into them or moving into them as they execute this technique.
Those are three basic penetration steps. All three are used in a different area. I really believe that it's critical that you teach your wrestlers to use all three of those penetration steps and to learn and understand why they do them. That's the whole basis for this videotape series. To educate your wrestlers on why you do what you do. There is a fourth type of penetration step where your opponent brings his hips to you. And we call that a double knee drop. Actually, there's no step involved. What it amounts to is your opponent pushing on you very hard and you dropping to both knees. Those are the type of penetration steps that get your hips close to your opponent's hips.
In this example, John Smith uses a double knee drop type of penetration on this opposite side duck to a high crotch takedown. Again at normal speed. Here we have the same double knee drop penetration on this duck to a high crotch, viewed from another angle. Again at normal speed. Olympic and world champion Arsen Fedzayev of Russia has secured a front headlock on his opponent. From this position, he uses a double knee drop penetration to secure a high crotch, and from there, with a great deal of patience, secures a finish.
Okay, now that we've gone over 4 of the basic skills, we're going to start on number 5, which is lifting. Remember that you stayed in good position, you had some motion, you changed levels, and you penetrated. You got to your opponent. Once you get to your opponent, you're going to have to be able to lift your opponent or cut the angle and take him down, or what I call making an L. So with your partner, the key ingredient here, I'm going to put all these steps together. I'm in good position. My opponent's in good position. He's in a good stance. From this position, I'm going to create a little motion where I'm going to just take a half a step back to get him to lean towards me. It puts me in my drop step position. From there, I'm now going to change levels and penetrate. From this position here, boom, once I get here, from here, now I'm going to come up to a good position so that if he backs away from me completely, I'm in a good stance here. So when he comes back in, from this position right here, my hips and legs are going to lift my opponent right here. I'm going to do a little hip pop and lift my opponent. This makes it very easy for me to lift my opponent. When I get to this position here, where I penetrated and this foot came up, I'm in very tight to my opponent here. I'm in tight, and it's real easy for me to lift my opponent. If his hips are away from me, here, and he were to back away from this position, I'm not in very good position here. And if I'm not in good position, I'm not going to be able to lift my opponent. So, when I get back in here, I come in, I'm in a good stance right here. It makes it very easy for me to lift my opponent. Now, the other part of this, I call making an L. So I don't have to lift my opponent and work real hard. I'm going to cut an angle. And when I talked about penetration, where I did a pound step, and I'm driving, knee touches glass, comes up, now I'm turning 90-degree angle and changing direction to take my opponent down. We call this a flare. And I'm going to flare my opponent, block his knee. It's still a lift, but it's more of a block. Key ingredients to this. 1, when I get to my opponent, I pound, step, drive, legs done. All it's going to do, this toe has to point 90-degree angle across here. From there, this hand's going to block the knee, and now I'm going to step this direction to here. And then I would actually be lifting it. Right? We call that a flare. But here's a key ingredient. When I do my inside step, and I get to my opponent here, this foot, when I come up, does not stay between the legs. Because for me to walk now, watch his hips just continue to turn. And you end up in this. Instead, you want a 90-degree turn, block the knee. Now watch if he tries to back out, he's still going to go down in this position. Alright? So, from here, pound, step, drive, immediately, 90 degrees, blocking the knee, and taking your opponent.
In this example of a lift, Zeke Jones drops into high crotch position, secures a leg tight to his chest. He then executes a hip pop, driving his opponent up and down to the mat across his shoulders. Again at normal speed. Here we see Ken Melchiori in on a double leg on Kendall Cross. He picks him up and elevates him, keeping him off the mat. From here he executes a back arch throw to secure back points and the takedown. Again at normal speed. In this example, we see Tim Vanny shooting in on a head inside single using a low-level flare to take his opponent to the mat. Once again at normal speed.
Okay, the sixth skill we're going to cover today is a sprawl. I believe this is very critical because I like to use or coach what I call counter offense. And before you can counter offense, you have to be able to sprawl. It's a basic skill. Here's the basic ingredients of a sprawl. First of all, when I sprawl, I want my hips to go straight down. I don't want to. And other coaches disagree with this, but I don't want to bump my opponent. And the reason for that is, anytime I do this, my hips come up. That's the first thing. Second, I don't want to kick my legs up in the air. I don't want to kick them up here. Because when I do that, my hips come up again. Anytime my hips come up, it allows my opponent an opportunity to get underneath me. What I'd really like to do when I'm in good position here and somebody shoots on me, I'm going to take my hips straight down. Here. Straight down. From that position, for example, if my opponent were to shoot at this leg, it goes back here and my hips go straight down. From this position, I've got a straight leg that he shot at and a bent leg. Because I talk counter offense, not defense, a big difference. From this position right here, I'm now going to circle up to the bent leg to get behind my opponent. To demonstrate this a little bit, I use my partner again, and watch what happens. He's going to shoot on me, and I'm going to kick my legs back. And he's just shooting a double leg. Shoot. Here, in this position. Anytime I'm here, he can raise me up, get me off the mat. Right? The second part of this time he shoots, and he's in this position here, he shoots on me, and I try to bump him. But watch what happens if he lifts, when I bump here, he'll lift me up. And that's not the situation I'm looking for. What I want to be able to do, when he shoots, I want to be able to drop my hips straight down. Here. Straight down. From this position, I don't want to circle to the straight leg. And here's the reason for that. He shoots, and I've sprawled in this position here. I've got a bent leg on this side, straight leg on this side. He's got a hold of this leg. If I try to circle this way, his head will pop out and cut me down. Like a cut across. But from this position right here, from the bent leg, I am able to get a wide arc and circle this way to get behind my opponent. So, with no partner again, you have to understand when you do this drill that it's instilled in your wrestlers that when you sprawl, your hips go straight down. Once they go straight down, you immediately circle to the bent leg side. So you score on your opponent. So that if somebody was shooting on this leg, this leg's going to go straight here. I'm in this position. I would now circle in this direction. Right? If he shoots on this leg goes back, this leg's bent, and I circle this way. Right? So that takes care of the sprawl.
We can see the mechanics of this sprawling action here as John Smith shoots in on a high crotch. His North Korean opponent immediately straightens his leg back in a sprawling action, circling to the bent leg. In this example, his North Korean opponent shoots in. John immediately drops his hips to the mat and keeps his hips low and to the mat until he's able to settle into a front body lock position where he can begin a counter offense.
The seventh basic skill that we're going to work on today is a back step. And there's a couple things that are real important in our next two basic skills. And as a coach, you have to be able to understand this. The reason you really teach a back step and a back arch, which are our two next basic skills, is to always give your wrestler an opportunity to win. And what I mean is this, very simply. If the score is 5-0 and there's 30 seconds left in the match and your wrestler hasn't been able to take your opponent down, he doesn't just quit because he can't take him down. You have to give your wrestler an opportunity to throw your opponent. And to throw your opponent, you have to be able to do a back step or you have to be able to do a back arch. One of those two basic skills. And that's the main reason for teaching a back step. Although a back step comes into play, when you run the pipe or you do some other little basic skills, all right? Some other techniques. So, back step, very simply, this is what I want you to think about. A back step, what I want to do in a back step is take my hips, put them underneath my opponent's hips to lift him and use his momentum to throw him. So I need to turn 180 degrees. When I talk about a back step, it's a step. This toe goes to my heel. I'm going to turn 180 degrees and change levels in this direction. So that I take my hips, put them underneath my opponent's hips, and from there I would explode and take him forward. But the basic back step is to get the feet right. I don't want my feet, when I do this, to extend more than 4 or 5 inches here. This is not too bad here. But you don't want this type of step where you're trying to turn, because I can't turn 180 degrees. To show you what I'm talking about, and we're not into technique here, all I want you to be able to do is get the back step down. If he's touching me, I do a forearm hook here, I do a little step here, and I'm going to put my hips underneath my opponent's hips. So I'm going to go right here. Now, from this position right here, this gives me the ability to throw my opponent here. It makes it very easy. Several different techniques that you can use from there. Head and arm, hip toss, but you have to be able to do the basic skill of a back step.
In this example, we see Bill Shearer's step, back step, and pivot directly to his knees as he executes an arm throw. Here's a variation of this arm throw with Dave Schultz. Notice that he almost pivots directly to the knees.
The next basic skill we're going to talk about is a back arch. And that's scary for a lot of people. But it shouldn't be. You should be able to do it in steps. Very simply, what I'm going to do with a back arch is the same thing I do with a back step, only I'm going to take my hips from the front, put them underneath my opponent's, lift his hips with my hips, and take him into a back arch. Now this would scare me too if I just started with a back arch up here. So I teach this in basic steps. And I use a partner to do this. I'm going to take both his hands here. One, he's going to step right between my legs, a little step. Two, he's now going to change levels where he's squatting down a little bit. Now, from there, that's not very far to go. From now, he's going to back arch, hit his arch, and I'm going to help him down, and then he's going to turn out of it. All right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about a back arch. I'm going to take my hips underneath my opponent's hips, lock, and throw. And I'm going to do that now, and watch how easy this really is. I'm in a body lock position. From here, 1, I'm going to step. 2, I'm changing levels. 3, I'm back arching.
Here we have an example of this back arch skill in this belly-to-belly throw with Nate Carr against his Cuban opponent. we have an example of this same back arch skill, but this time in a belly-to-back position with John Smith against Stefan Sarkisian of Russia, the Olympic silver medalist in 1988.
The next basic skill that we're going to cover is grips. And very simply, I'll just show the grips so you understand them, and then when we do the drills, we'll talk about why and in what positions we use them. So when we get into the technique portion of this videotape, you'll understand and we'll talk about what grips to use. The first grip I want to talk about is a knuckle grip. And that's very simply my hands coming together just like this, thumbs are in, and I lock my hands like that in this position. And at various times you'll switch your hands. From one time it'll be on top if I'm around the leg, the next time if I'm around the other leg it may be in this position. Right? But that's called a knuckle grip. The next grip is called a hand clasp, where my thumbs are together, my palms fit like this, and I just fold them over and grip. This is probably the strongest grip there is, especially when you're around the leg and you have the weight pushing down here. Right? The next lock we'd call a butterfly lock, where I'm in this position and this position. You see this a lot in freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling when you're going to attack a gut wrench position. From this position I'm able to slide my hands up or down in this. But that's called a butterfly lock. I'm just locking around like that. The next lock we're going to talk about is a forearm hook. And very simply it's like this. I'm just hooking it. My thumbs are in, I'm hooking here, and from there I can pinch my elbows and pull. But those are the grips that we're going to talk about while we use this videotape or video series. But what you have to think about is when we get into the technique portion, we'll be able to tell you when to use a knuckle grip, when to use a hand clasp, when to use a forearm hook, or when to use a butterfly grip. When we talk about the basic skill of contact, we're actually talking about tie-ups, or what I call control points. A basic thing to remember about when you tie up with your opponent is to always have inside position. Inside position is superior for both offensive techniques and defensive techniques. The first contact we're going to do is a head tie. When I come to my opponent here and I'm going to go ahead and do a head tie, I don't really want to reach from this angle here because I've created too much space here. If we go back to the simplest thing and we talk about position, this is not good position. My head is up, my back is straight, my elbow is in over here, but this elbow is not in, and it gives my opponent an opportunity to score. So, when I do a contact, when I'm making contact, I stay in good position, move to my opponent in this direction. Now, when I close the gap here, I'm in good position, and now I secure the head tie. But notice I stayed in good position when I moved in here. And now I'm not extending my arm, I just simply grab. When I do a head tie, this hand is staying open. Maybe I want to do a shock to here, or maybe I want to do a high crotch, or I'm going to hit a single leg. But a head tie up, in this position, my elbow's in tight, I get in the head, my elbow pinches to the inside. I don't want him controlling it. My hand, thumb is in, I cut behind the head here, so that I'm in this position here. My elbow's in tight, I've got his head right here. I'm pulling him in here tight. Alright, this hand is free. This contact position is called a head tie.
Here's an example of this head tie contact position with Bruce Baumgartner.
Next contact position we're going to do is out of a head tie, but we're going to do a head and bicep tie-up. Remember, I'm going to stay in good position. I'm going to close the gap on my opponent, and I'm going to reach. As I reach, my feet move, so I'm closing the gap. From there, my elbow's going to pinch inside, and all good wrestlers will do just what Joe's done. He's going to try to control my elbow. From this position right here, I'm going to tie up both hands now and do a head and bicep tie-up, where I'm going to take him right here, at the bicep, actually just below it. I'm going to use this hook right here to block him off and control him right here. So that if he were to try to shoot a high crotch here, I have this arm blocked off. At the same time, I'm able to move him this way, or I'm able to move him back across this way. But I'm in pretty good position here by blocking this off. Some people like to take the head and bicep tie-up in this position here. I don't like it as well because it opens up his high crotch and he has freedom to move that arm. So anytime you do a head and bicep tie-up, this position right here, I like to use the hook right here so that I'm pushing this in or I'm pulling it out. Pushing it and pulling it. Keeping his head in here tight, just like a regular head tie, only now I have the bicep. As I come in here, I am now going to hook again and take my opponent's elbows right here. It makes it very difficult when I'm in a one bicep tie-up or two bicep tie-up for my opponent to penetrate on me. That's very important for keeping the hook. When I'm in this position, whether I have one hand or two, I want to block him off and keep him from having an arm free so that he can penetrate. Remember, I don't really want to hook on the outside when I hook the bicep here because it gives him an opportunity to penetrate. If I'm hooking here and I'm controlling this bicep in this position with my hook, it's very hard for him to shoot or do anything with this arm. I'm controlling it by pushing it in here. My elbows are in. I have very little space in here. I'm able to pass it by and go into some various techniques from there. Okay, the tie-up we're going to work on now after we make contact, I want my opponent to make contact with me. So I'm going to stay in good position and I'm going to walk into my opponent. And 99 out of 100 times when I walk into my opponent, he's going to put hands on me. When he puts hands on me, I'm then going to control his elbow and go to an elbow tie-up. I can control one elbow or two elbows depending on how many hands he puts on me. But from this position right here, remember, always staying in good position. I close the gap on my opponent. When he touches me, I immediately control the elbow here. Now here's the key to an elbow tie-up. I've still got a hook here. I'm just above the elbow, and I'm actually going to pinch it a little bit here. As I do this, from this position right here, if he's not comfortable, he'll try to back out, and I have to go with him to control the elbow tie-up. Because what I want to do is not allow this position to get away now. If he tries to pull this away, then I'm going to follow it. But we'll talk about specific techniques later. But what I want to be able to do is keep this elbow bent. I want to control it here. And I want to keep this bend in the elbow so that if he tries to pull away or push into me, I'm closing the gap here, that I don't allow any space here to allow him to come back to this side. What I want to be able to do is keep the elbow. If he puts two hands on me or blocks me off in this manner, I'm now going to take both elbows from here. The way he's blocking off with his thumbs is what he should be doing, but I'm going to roll this, pop those off in this position right here, and now I'm going to have double elbow control right here. Again, I stay in good position here. Once I get a hook here, and I'm pinching this a little bit, he's going to have a difficult time backing up. I just go with him. If he pushes into me at all, it makes it real easy for me to get underneath him. I feel real good about an elbow tie-up. When you learn how to control those elbows, you'll be in a position to score a lot of takedowns. next contact position we're going to talk about is a 2-on-1. And although there's several different ways to get into the position of the 2-on-1, we'll only cover a couple different situations here. But what we'll talk about is the basic contact, what you do after you have a 2-on-1 and why you have it. First of all, if I walk to my opponent and he puts a hand on me and he ties up my head here, very simply, I stay in good position here. I go to my elbow control right here where I'm pinching this. Now, this hand crosses over and he's got a pretty good hook on my head. So what I'm going to have to do here, I'm going to look away from my opponent, create a little space, and take this off. Now watch what I do when I hit this position right here. I've cleared this position off, but I actually want to turn this wrist a little bit. I don't just keep it square. If I do this, and we'll work this technique later, but he can hit a single leg back to this side very easy. I've actually directed him down there. Right? So when I clear this off, what I want to do when he's in this position, I control the elbow, I look away, I turn this a little bit in this direction so it's bent. Now, once I'm in a 2-on-1 position, couple different ways to hook it up. One, bring it tight to your body. And you'll resist me a little bit on this. From this position right here, what I want to do is get pressure down with my 2-on-1 in this position. At the same time, I have this thing turned. It takes away a lot of the things that he can do to counter it. But I'm in here tight. I'm in good position. Like to keep my head close to his head here in this position. But don't just keep it here. There's two things that you would do here. One, when I get this tie up, I get weight down in this direction or up in this direction. But when I get the tie up, I hook just like this, and I'm turning the wrist. The other thing to do off the 2-on-1, and another real simple setup is this. If I want a 2-on-1, oftentimes I'll leave this hand out here just like this, and they'll grab it. As soon as they grab it, I'm bringing it across, coming right into my 2-on-1. Right? Again, I just go here, catching his wrist. And when I do this, and I bring it across here, I need to close the gap. This time I'm going to come over the top and hook my own wrist here for 2-on-1. Again, I'm not getting this 2-on-1 just to hang on to it. When I get to this position, my weight is down here. I want weight coming forward so I can go into some of the various techniques. We'll go into some techniques on a later video. But the contact and the tie-up off a 2-on-1, great position to be in because there's not a lot of techniques he can do out of that position, but there's a lot of things that I can do. So anytime you can secure a 2-on-1, you're in great shape. Okay, the next tie-up we're going to go into is an underhook position. This is another tie-up that really gives you a position of advantage. And that's what we're always looking for in wrestling is a position of advantage. In this situation, and there's a lot of different ways you can end up in an underhook also. Your opponent can shoot on you. You can block him and come to an underhook. But if I want to take charge and get an underhook, a couple different ways to do it. One, I'm just going to I'm going to go to a head tie-up. I'm in good position here. As soon as I get his head right here, I'm going to pull it this direction. When I do that, I'm then going to shoot my arm on this side. As I do this, I stay in good position. I'm down in here, I'm in good position, and I shoot my underhook here. Now, when I get an underhook, and I'll do it from this side, I want my hand up over the top. And I want this elbow to control his elbow in this position. I don't want him to be able to get this elbow down. For example, if he has an underhook on me and I'm able to get this elbow back here and down, I can still hit a lot of different techniques here. So when you get in this position right here, I'm up over the top, this elbow, think in terms of controlling this elbow. And I'm in this position. My head is in tight, and now I'm controlling this, and I can move him around. I'm in good position. One underhook. But the second this elbow gets a little low, it really puts a lot of pressure on me. I have to carry his weight. So when you get in this position, get that elbow up, over the arm, and a lot of different techniques you can attack here. And we'll go into those different techniques later. A real position of advantage is a variation off an underhook where you get a double underhook, and you're in great position. So if I have an underhook right here, and I'm going to work my head into this position and maybe circle him around a little bit and come up into this position where I'm in a double underhook. And this is very important with the double underhook. I want to get him up, and immediately what I want to do is change directions and get him going backwards. From this position right here, I'm in pretty good shape to score. I can inside trip, I can high dive, but from this position here of a double underhook, I want to take his elbows up here. Now if he tries to bring his elbows down, it's too late, and I'm in good position to body lock, to trip, to double leg, a lot of different techniques that I can do in that position. But when I'm in this underhook position and I'm going to fight for two, I'm going to clear my head to this side here and come up here. From this position, you have to be careful, and immediately I want my weight taking him backwards. If I don't, if I stay in here, he can inside trip me in this position, take me down, right? So it's very important, once you get this position, to get his weight back this way. You see what I've done? I've taken away his inside trip, some different techniques he can do. So when I get this position here, I change the direction, good contact, good tie-up, good position, but I want his weight backwards, this way. The next contact we're going to do is wrist tie-ups. Another great position to be in, and oftentimes, especially European countries, are great at hand fighting and controlling the wrists. And as a wrestler, as you progress up through the years, make sure that you control the wrists in the correct position. And when I say the correct position, this is what I mean. Anytime I want wrist control and he's in good position here, I do not want to grab his wrists like this, whether it's one or it's two. And the reason is this: if I grab him from the outside in here, he's able to penetrate on me, and it's very difficult for me to stop him. If I grab one, he can penetrate to this side. If I grab both, he can go to both legs. So I don't want to grab the wrist from the outside. But wrist control is very important. So when I do contact and tie-up, I do wrist control from the inside out. Watch what happens now when I grab his wrist. I'm going to grab his wrist here in this position and turn it a little bit. But now, if he tries to penetrate on me or come on me, I have an arm between him and me. At the same time, and I'll go to a double wrist tie-up here, watch the position that it puts me in. This time when I grab his wrist and I turn him a little bit, he's uncomfortable with this, and oftentimes they'll try to pull him back. When they do, it allows me an opening to get to my opponent. So anytime you do wrist control, make sure you come from the inside out rather than the outside in, right? If he ties my head and I want a wrist control, I'm going to turn it, and take it in this position, right here. And when we get into the technique, you'll understand why I do this position. If he pulls this back, I just penetrate to here. If he stays in that position right there and makes it difficult and starts to back out a little bit, I then attack the opposite side. But wrist control is a great position to be in as long as you're inside out control. the one thing you have to be aware of in wrist control is arm drags. All right? Thought I better cover this now. We'll get into it in our technique and countering and clearing wrist tie-ups. But very important, if I do this right here and I leave too much room for him to hit an arm drag here, it opens him up. So anytime I do contact or wrist tie-ups, watch the position of my head. Here. If I'm controlling this side right here, my head will stop him from getting over here to drag. And at the same time, it opens up possibilities for me. So anytime you do wrist tie-ups, control, make sure you stay in good position and you're conscious of your head. Keep it in the right position so your opponent can't arm drag you. But wrist control is another great tie-up. Next contact or tie-up we're going to do is a forearm hook. And keep in mind, this is a freestyle and a folk style syllabus, and some of the techniques when we get into them we'll talk about what are high percentage moves and what are not high percentage moves. But in freestyle the scoring is a little bit different and the risk taking is a little bit different. For example, in freestyle, if I try a throw or a shoulder throw or a head and arm and I slip down to the mat and he falls on top of me, he doesn't get any points because it's called a slip throw. But the next tie-up is very important for this aspect of it. And we call this a forearm hook. And very simply, I'm going to walk into my opponent, and when he puts hands on me, I'm immediately going to go to a forearm hook. And here's the situation. I walk to my opponent. When he touches me, I immediately go to a forearm hook. I'm just coming over the top of his forearm, and I'm trapping it right here in this position. And it's really difficult for him to create space here. When he starts to pull away, it gives me the opportunity to hit. If I walk in and he ties up the other side here, the forearm hook is over the top. Or an underarm spin, some various techniques, but it's real simple. So when I get in this position, he ties up, this comes over the top. Immediately, I pinch it. I'm going to pinch the back of his head, or back of his hand with my head. At the same time, I'm going to hook his forearm in this position here. I want to get a hold of this forearm so it's difficult for him to get it out here. As a matter of fact, the only avenue of escape he really has is by taking his hand down. There. If I want to trap it more in the forearm hook, this is what I do. I just grab it. From this position right here, now this is really hard for him to get this released. This position, right? And that allows me my throw position. So the forearm hook, I'm coming over the top, hook, trapping his hand with my head, pulling it. If he's trying to pull it down, and you'll be able to feel that right away, you also have the option to come in on this side and trap his elbow. Right? The next basic skill we're going to talk about is a setup. The object of a setup is to get your opponent out of position or move him so you can create an angle to use your technique. It's a very basic skill, but one that needs to be worked on a regular basis.
The first setup I'm going to talk about is a pop. And to get a pop, all I'm going to do is walk to my opponent. And oftentimes, opponents block with straight arms. They like to keep a distance with you. And anytime that occurs, a pop is open to you. Very simply this. I'm walking to my opponent, but he uses straight arms. Notice that his elbows are straight here. Anytime you get in this position, this is very difficult for me to just penetrate. It's hard for me to get by this man. So in this position right here on my setup, I'm going to lean on him a little bit so he has to get a little pressure back on me. From here, I'm going to pop the elbows up. As I do that, I'm going to pop here, and I'm actually blocking it rather than trying to pop it high so I can get underneath him here. But that's what we mean by a pop setup.
As Red reaches with straight arms, Blue uses a pop setup as he drops steps and changes elevation into this double leg takedown. Once he has secured his opponent's hips and legs, he lifts and from this position, bumps back for a finish. Again, at normal speed. As his opponent reaches, Bullshirt pops his arm up and inside steps to a high crotch position. Once there, he changes elevation again, driving his opponent up as he changes across to a double to finish. Again at real speed. With a forearm hook on one side, Blue pops the other arm and drop steps to a double leg. He then lifts, this time locking Blue's elbow, and dumps him back into a back arch throw to finish.
The next setup we're going to do is a chop. And it really goes in the same type of situation that you would use a pop with, except you're way better off in this situation. Watch what happens this time when I walk into my opponent and he puts both hands on me or one hand on me. But this time he's got a little bend in it. He's closed the gap a little bit. He doesn't have straight arms. Anytime he's in this position here and I walk in and there's a bend in his arm here, it's real hard for me to pop this. I'd have to hit it just right, get above his elbows, and that's very difficult to do. So rather than trying to pop up this time, I'm going to hook over the top this way because he has bent arms. I'm going to take a little step backwards and I'm going to chop in this position. All right? You have to understand the difference in these two situations. The straight arms, I want to pop them up. As a matter of fact, if he comes straight arms on me and I try to chop that, he has so much distance in his arms, he'll get his arms back to block you before you'll ever get to him. In this position, if he's straight arms here and I try to chop, he'll get his arms back into good position there, and I haven't accomplished anything but to get his arms off. But if we're in this position and he's been armed, now watch what happens. Anytime I do a little chop here, I really get a snap. There's a bend in the arms. It's going to take his momentum forward. So anytime I do a setup and he's got bent arms, I want to chop that down. As I chop on my setup, my hands come back inside in this position here. So that if he were to attack, and oftentimes this is a good way, and we'll talk about this when we get into technique, when I chop him, if he were to follow me and I didn't keep my hands inside, he'd be in good shape, whether it's one hand or two. But if I chop here and don't keep my hand inside, he can penetrate on me. So anytime you're using a chop in this position here, take your hands, leave them inside.
Here we see an example of this chop setup as Red uses a quick downward blow with his hands to snap Blue to the mat. Once again at normal speed. Barry Davis uses this chop setup not once, but several times in order to set up this near side cradle. Again.
The next setup we're going to talk about is a shuck. And when I talk about a shuck, I'm talking about taking the contact point across my body this time. So I'm going to walk into my opponent, he's going to put a hand on me, I'm immediately going to take a tie-up and control and shuck it across my body. Right? I walk in, the opponent puts hands on me. From this position right here, I can go to an elbow tie-up right here. I can look for a 2-on-1 tie-up. But my objective here on my setup is to clear him and shuck his arm across my body. For example, I'm going to go to a 2-on-1 here. I'm going to take this across my body in this position, immediately to step in here. But from that position, what I've done is a shuck. I can take it again, a little different this time. I walk in, he controls my head here. This time I'm going to shuck him across my body and snag the leg here. So I'm going to turn and step here for a shuck. But that setup's called a shuck, where I'm taking the contact point across my body this time. I could walk in here in this position, take control, and actually take the control point, which is his head this time, and shuck it across my body this way. But that's what we call a shuck setup.
From an elbow tie, Tim Vanny shucks or leads his opponent's elbow across his body to set up this single. He then changes to a double, lifts, and drives through for back exposure and possible fall on the takedown. At normal speed. Here's another example of the shuck setup.
This time the setup that we're going to talk about is an arm drag. And remember, what we're trying to do with setups is create an angle so that I have an opportunity to score by putting my opponent out of position. One way I can do this, very simply, I'm going to reach out and he's going to control my wrist in that position. Oftentimes wrestlers do that. Now I'm going to bring this across my body and I'm going to hit an arm drag, create an angle so that I can penetrate to my opponent and score. Again, I'm talking about arm drags for a setup. And anytime he puts hands on me, and we'll talk about this in the technique session, I'll be able to hit an arm drag on him. If I walk in and he tries to tie my head up here and ties up there, I can now take the control point, which is here, I can take it down, hit an arm drag. As I do that, I've created an angle so that I can set my opponent up so that I can penetrate. I can take the control point to the outside. He ties up, I can take the control point to the outside, hit an arm drag, and penetrate. But when I talk about setups and I talk about arm drags, when we get into the technique portion, you'll notice that all I'm really trying to do is drag the arm across the body. I'm going to bring it across so that I have an opportunity. I've created an angle so that I can penetrate to my opponent. I'm using an arm drag to set my opponent up for various techniques.
World silver medalist Chris Wilson of Canada uses an arm drag to set up this single leg attempt. Here's another example of this arm drag with six-time world champion Valentin Jordanov. Notice the patience he uses in executing it against his Japanese opponent.
The next setup we're going to work on is a pummel position. And you do your pummel position out of an over and under tie-up, or that's your control point or your contact point. So when I make contact with my partner, I'm going to walk into this position, go to a bicep tie-up maybe, pull an underhook so that I end up in an over and under position or a pummel position. From here, when I talk about a pummel, what I'm going to do is work this hand back inside here, just like this. This hand's going to come inside, but at the same time, I want my feet to move. Remember the basic concept, when my hands move, my feet move. So when I do this, and I pummel here, I want my feet to change so that I'm controlling the position. As I'm doing this, I'm now thinking about a setup. I'm pummeling for a setup. I'm not just pummeling for position, I'm pummeling to set my opponent up for different techniques. There's a lot of different techniques you can do, but understand the pummel, why you're doing it, and how you're setting your opponent up. So from this position, as I'm pummeling and I'm moving my feet, I'm concentrating on setting my opponent up. So the next time I come over the top and I come here, I can go to a shoulder throw, a pummeling here. I can pummel to a duck. But I'm using the pummel position out of an over and under to set my opponent up, to create an angle or a situation that gives me the opportunity to score. Using the pummel, inside, elbows in, moving my feet, feet move, hands move, your feet move, and I'm going to use that for a setup.
World silver medalist Jim Shear pummels to secure a double underhook on his German opponent. He then pivots and foot sweeps for back exposure on the takedown. Again at normal speed.
The next setup we're going to talk about is any fake or feint. Anything that I do to get a reaction out of my partner is actually a setup. If I was real quick and I didn't have a control point, what I would try to do is fake my opponent and get him to put weight on one foot or the other foot, so that allows me an opening or an angle to score. And when I talk about any fake, I'm talking about not making contact now, but I'm in this position, and any fake just to get a reaction out of my opponent to get him to step or to get him to move. So any fake or feint, but remember, anytime I do this, I stay in good position. That's the key to everything. Remember the basic skills. If I'm going to move my hands in here, my feet move right here. But I'm constantly moving and faking in this position here. Any fake or feint is a type of setup that can get your partner to put weight on one foot or the other and give you an angle of attack.
John Smith uses this fake or feint setup to secure this low single. He then changes to a double to finish. Let's look at several other examples of this setup on John Smith's low single. Jones fakes to the head, then outside steps to secure this single leg takedown.
Okay, the last setup that we're going to work on is what we call a post. And very simply, by a post, what I'm talking about doing is putting my opponent in a position, the point of control or the access point in a post where it's solid, it's not able to move. For example, if I walk to my opponent, he head ties me, and I'm going to clear to a 2-on-1, I want you to look at what I would post on this situation. I walk in, he controls, I go to a 2-on-1. From this position right here, I've closed the gap, I have good position, but I haven't really set him up yet. All I've done is got a control point. But this time, what I'm going to do is circle him just a little bit, and I'm going to get him to post this leg. Very simply, when I get him in a position to post, he's going to take a step with it. There. I'm going to put the weight on it, and now I've posted it in this position right here. When I'm talking about a post for a setup, I want my opponent in a position where this is solid, just like a post. A telephone pole is a post, so that now he can't pick that up. That's a post. That allows me to do an ankle pick or another type of setup. Another post that we might be talking about for setup, I'm going to walk in and get head control here. When he gets a little motion back into me, I'm going to snap him down to his hands and post his hands on the mat. From there, then I can go into my drag or my various techniques. Understand, when you watch these tapes and you watch these basic skills and these setups, well, I try not to do any of the technique. You have to understand the concept of what contact is, what the control point is, what a setup is, before we can ever get to the technique portion. Once you get to where you can understand those situations, those basic skills, then I think getting your takedowns and doing your technique will become a lot easier.
World and Olympic champion Larry Habeloff of Russia uses a 2-on-1 to post his opponent's hand to the mat. He then blocks behind the armpit and circles behind for the takedown. At normal speed, Zeke Jones chops down on his opponent's head to secure a front headlock, which he uses to post his opponent's leg to set up his ankle pick takedown. Again, at normal speed. Royce Alger chops his opponent's forearms to post him to the mat, where he then uses a short arm drag to go behind. Once again at normal speed. From a head-tied position, Chris Wilson drives his opponent's head over his foot to post his leg in order to secure this ankle pick takedown.
The 12th skill we're going to work on today, the basic skill, is a hip heist. The first 11 skills dealt with being on your feet more. But when we close out here, the next skills we talk about are going to be down on the mat. A hip heist is one of the most important skills to understand in wrestling. And there's a couple different hip heists. If I'm trying to get away from my opponent, the first hip heist is I'm going to try to get my hips as far away from my opponent as I can, because I have to do that to get away from him. The other type of hip heist is out of a bridge, for example, where I'm up in a bridge and I need to flip my hips so that I turn my hips from facing the ceiling down towards the mat. For example, the first hip heist, if I'm trying to get away from my opponent, here's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to create an angle with my hands, get my hips out, and I'm going to start them away from my opponent here in this situation. But look where I am in comparison to this circle and where I'm going to finish. When I get into this position right here, what I want to do is still get my hips as far away from my opponent as I can so he can't snap me down or get back behind me. So I'm going to straighten this leg. And when I do that, when I straighten this leg right here, it's going to create a little distance. And watch what happens with my hips when I flip them. Now, from this position right here, I'm in a sprawl position. I'm facing my opponent, and I'm going to circle up. So if you have a partner on you, and you're in a referee's position here, and he's on top of me, I'm going to do a hip heist where I'm going to create space and distance from my opponent. I'm going to create an angle, coming out to the top. I'm going to clear my hips here. Well, once I get to this position right here, I want to get a little further away. So this leg straightens here. I'm creating distance. I turn to the outside, and now I've created a lot of space between me and my opponent. But another type of hip heist is going to take me where I just flip my hips. And an example would be like this. If I'm in on a low single leg and I duck between his legs, you see this situation a lot now since John Smith has really revolutionized the low single leg takedown. But in this position right here, where you have your opponent up, and now I'm going to set him down here in this position. For me to do a hip heist now, I don't want my hips to go away from my opponent. All I want to do is flip my hips towards his head here. That's another form of a hip heist. Both times, I'm taking my hips from facing up to flipping them so that they're facing down. Again, another situation to be able to do that without a partner is a simple bridge. If I'm in a back bridge here and I want to get off my back, I have to be able to cut my legs under and hip heist. So a hip heist, the simplest and basic skill, is taking your hips and flipping them. But you have to understand the difference of when you want to get your hips away from your opponent or when you want to just flip your hips and stay in the same position.
Here's an example of this hip heist skill as it's used to execute an escape from parterre position for 1 point. Again at normal speed.
Now we're going to talk about offensive takedowns and finishes. We've tried to concentrate on the offensive takedowns and finishes that occur at all age levels and are most effective. Keep in mind as you watch the video that if one of the finishes doesn't work, you immediately go to the second one. We've tried to create a situation where you have 3 finishes in a row, one setting up the other.
As we start our takedown technique, there's 3 important principles that I want you to think about and watch as we go through this technique. First of all, I want to talk about the control points. And when I talk about control points, I'm talking about anytime I get a hold of a wrist or an elbow or a head, whatever it is that I make contact with my opponent, that's the control point. And there's only 4 ways to take that control point. I can take it down, I can take it to the outside, I can take it over the top of my head, or I can take it across my body. The second principle I want to talk about is where to step. When you have your opponent, there's only 5 places that I can step on my opponent. If I have my opponent here, I want to step to the outside 2 or 3 inches, to the inside 2 or 3 inches. I step to right between his legs, and I can step to the inside of this foot, right here 2 or 3 inches, or to the outside 2 or 3 inches. Now when I do that by stepping with the outside foot, I can step with the inside foot, I can step between the legs, I can step here, or I can step here. I want to go toe to toe. I don't want to go too deep, and I don't want to go too shallow. So as you watch the technique, I want you to watch the control points, I want you to watch where to step, and the third principle I want to talk about is a half-man theory, where we're talking about creating an angle on our opponent. Anytime I have my opponent here, before I attack him, I'm going to get what we call a half-man theory, where I put his leg right between my leg. I don't want to be square to him here because we're equal. Before I attack, I'm going to either, and there's 2 ways of doing this, I'm going to step here and here to create a half-man theory to attack this leg. Keep in mind, anytime I've created this angle, I've also put him in the same situation in a half-man theory. The second thing to think about, when I take a control point, for example, clearing this across here, when I take this control point this time across my body, I'm going to put this guy in a half-man to me, here. When I've done that, I've now put him half-man to me, right here. I'm going to take the control point this time across my body, and as I do that, now I've put his leg halfway between here, and it allows me to step to one of the 5 positions. In this case, I'd step right between the legs. The first technique we're going to work today is a double leg, and we're going to work it in a high-level situation. We're going to work the double leg with 3 different finishes and why we would go to each of those 3 finishes. Before I start this, I want you to keep in mind there's several different setups, several different ways to get into the situation where you take the double leg, but we're just going to go over one of these right now. I'm going to walk to my opponent. When he pulls a hand, I'm going to be real disciplined. When I walk to him, he'll try to stop me with one of his hands. When he does that, that's the first principle I want to be able to talk about, the control point. So as I walk to him, hand comes to me, I'm immediately going to clear this hand off, my control point right here. I'm going to shuck it off here. At the same time, I'm taking a little step here. Now I've created an angle, my half man, and now I'm going to penetrate to a high-level double leg here in this position. My hands go right behind the knees here. From this position, I've stepped right between the legs, one of the 5 stepping points. From here, now I'm just going to continue to tackle and drive here. We'll take my opponent down. So the first technique high-level double leg with a finish. I'm going to walk to my opponent. He's going to post this time. I'm going to clear a control point across my body, take a half man to the outside, pound, step, from here, high-level tackle. I'm going to let go of this because once I've crossed this across my body, my head has now blocked it off and he can't get it back. My hands go right behind the knees. I've stepped right between the legs, high-level, double leg tackle. Now, as I hit, and we'll do one more and do it faster, I'm going to post so I don't get rolled through. I walk to him, he's going to post me off. When he does, I control it off, step, tackle. That position.
From wrist control, David Zuniga fakes an arm drag and drop steps to this double leg. Notice the control he has as his trail leg comes up and he drives his opponent straight through to the mat. From a non-contact position, Kevin Jackson taps his opponent's head, then his shoulder, and his opponent comes back in. He penetrates under for the double, driving him straight to the mat. From the non-contact position, Kerry Kolat penetrates straight through his opponent to take him to the mat. Here's another example with Olympic and world champion Young Soon Park of Korea.
The second situation that occurs off a high-level double leg is when he reacts to me and gets his hips back a little bit and doesn't go down. I'll still hit the same double leg, but he'll get his legs back a little bit, so I won't be able to get the tackle. I walk, he touches, clear it off, created my half man, step. When I hit this time, he's backing up. I immediately follow my hips up. I can't allow any room in here. So now this leg's done all it's going to do. It comes up, 90 degree, make the L. Now I'm going to flare my opponent down. Here. This time I walk, control point across my body, put my opponent half man, step, but this time he flares. I drive, post on the outside, lock the knee. Now I'm going to flare my opponent here.
Here's a good example of this flare finish for the double with Barry Davis. Here's another good example with John Fisher. Even though the ref is in the way part of the time here, pay close attention. It is a good example.
The last takedown we're going to do on a high-level double leg or the last finish, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to clear the control point, step between the legs, try to tackle him, but to get his legs back. The second thing, I'm going to try to flare, but he's going to get his leg way out and not allow me to get the flare. And that'll open up the third finish for a high-level double leg, which is running the pipe. He's going to post, I'm going to come to this position right here, and I'm going to try to knock him down. But as he doesn't go, I'm going to come up, because my leg comes up quick. I'm trying to make an L, but this leg right here gets out away from me, here. And I can't flare it. That allows me, position here where I've hooked, to just back step and set my opponent down. So 1, I try to tackle. 2, I try to flare. If I can't get one of those 2, that means I'll be able to run the pipe. Again, cross, hit, try to flare, can't do it, run the pipe. Right? We'll do it with the other arm this time. I walk, hit, try to flare, can't do it. I'm going to back step, set my opponent down. Let me show you what happens if I clear a high level and I try to run the pipe too soon and he doesn't get a wide base. I walk, clear, here. But if I immediately try to run the pipe without this leg being wide, he'll just hop with me in this position. But it makes it very easy for me to flare.
As Barry Davis starts to run the pipe on this double leg finish, his opponent tries an over-under throw to counter. Barry posts out with both hands to stay on top and get the finish.
Okay, now we're going to work a double leg where we get trapped down on the mat and we can't get up to our feet right away because our opponent has stopped us. And we're going to work some finishes from that. The first technique we're going to work is a lift and flare. So I'm going to walk to my opponent. When he touches me, I clear the control point across and I shoot, but I get trapped right down here in this position. So I'm in a double leg position down on the mat. My trail leg is up, my hips are in tight like they should be, and I'm in this position. I'm coming right behind the knees. From here, I'm just going to change levels a little bit. As you can see, I'm not completely up in the air here. I'm kind of squatted down, but at the same time, I'm in good position. From here, I'm going to raise my opponent up and flare the far knee here. I'm going to lift him up and flare the knee in this position. I'm going to hit a double leg. He's going to stop me. Here. From this position, my trail leg has come up. I'm going to squat a little bit down here. Then I'm going to raise my opponent up and flare.
Here's an example of slow-level flow with Olympic medalist and world champion Sergei Smolov-Belarushin. As he traps the far knee and lifts his opponent or flares him across, his opponent tries a body lock to counter. He then circles toward the head, threatening back exposure in order to get his opponent to belly out and get the takedown. Here's another example of this low-level flare with world bronze medalist Kirk Trost of the United States.
The second technique I'm going to do from here is if he counters that technique where I lift and I can't reach the far side, right? He touches, I clear, hit my double leg, I'm trapped down here, and he has this leg wide. This time I'm going to step to the outside here, pull right at the knee, and cut him down this way. Going to cut across my opponent. Here, hit. I've been stopped down here. My trail leg is up. I can't flare him here, so I'm going to step up to the outside, pull the far knee, and cut around the corner. Cut across.
Notice the head pressure Kirk Trost uses as he steps up and pulls the far knee to cut across on this double leg finish. Notice how Steve Knight has to re-step to maintain control as he pressures with his head and pulls the far knee. He then steps over both of his opponent's legs to complete the finish. Here's another example of this cut-across finish with Dan Mayo of Foxcatcher.
This time I'm going to take the control point to the outside and then across my body to hit this double leg. Walk in, he touches, clear it to the outside, across my body, I've created an angle, I'm half man, hit my low level double leg right here. From this position, knee to the inside, my trail leg's going to come up because it's done all it can do. It wants to come up quick, and I'm going to trip this outside leg. Here, keep my weight going forward. I'm going to feel that right away. Walk in, he touches, drag, hit, trip, hit. As I hit my outside trip, I want to get right behind the heel. I don't want to try to trip too high. From this position here, trail leg comes up immediately. I'm setting it down. My momentum continues forward. And I spread wide so I can't be rolled through. The next trip we're going to do is a little inside trip. And actually this works better on taller opponents. That as you try to lift and flare, you can't get them off the mat. They start to hook around you in a body lock position, and you want to trip inside in this situation. I hit here, with legs up. I'm trying to lift, but this guy just gets taller on me and taller. So what I'm going to do this time is take my inside knee, switch this knee down, and trip inside. Here. When you find yourself wrestling a taller opponent, this technique becomes very effective. Low level double leg. Here, I'm trying to lift, but he gets tall and I can't get him up. This knee's already in tight. I put the outside knee down and I just trip inside. Even if he's looking for a body lock, get him around my stomach here and lock. I want to hit inside here. Again, I just set the foot down, trip over it, to this position. Again, I want my arms wide so that he can't roll me through.
This is an excellent example of this outside trip finish for this double leg with Kirk Trost. Booker Bedford uses the same outside trip finish from a higher level. Here we see an inside trip finish on this double from the feet with Greg Olinsky.
The next finish we're going to work off a double leg situation is when your opponent gets wrapped around your waist. I'm going to hit a good double leg. He's going to get good reaction, get his hips back, but at the same time, he's going to block around my waist, and this is a technique that you would use. I walk to my opponent. When he touches, again, I can take the control point down, to the outside, across my body, or over the back. This time I'm going to take my control point down, hit a little drag, hit my double leg. In this position. When I get here, he immediately gets his hips back in this position and wraps around my waist here. The first thing that I need to do is get my hips back underneath me. So I'm actually going to post my hand, slide my inside knee up here in this position. Now, I've gotten my hips in pretty good position where if he were to back away from me now, go ahead and back away. I'm in good, solid position here. That's very important. Don't try to do this technique if you're leaning forward at all. So if he has me extended, I post this hand, slide my inside knee up, so I'm back in good position. He's still around my waist. What I'm going to do here is take this hand, hook his wrist. I don't really want to hook his elbow because he has a tendency to be able to slide it out. If I just do this, he can slide it out. If I grab his wrist and he tries to pull it out, he won't get it out. From this position now, I'm going to take an outside step with this knee here. From there, I'm just rolling over his shoulder that I have trapped. And from this position, I'm going to keep him here, get my points, and then hip heights towards his head. All right? Again, I'm in a double leg position here. I'm down here. I immediately, because he sprawled, did a good job. When I get my hips back under me, I post the hand. My inside knee will slide to this position. From there, I'm going to trap the wrist here. I'm going to take a little outside step, put his shoulder down right here. Now I'm in a crab walk position. I don't really want to stay on my butt. From here, I'm coming up, so I'm holding my opponent down here. Another thing that is very important in this technique situation is when I get him down, let's start this, in this position here. He's back, but when I get him back here, I come up on my feet. This hand is posting down. Don't hip heist and turn towards his legs. If I do that, watch his hips and I'll try to chase him. And that's what will happen. Seen a lot of good takedowns lost in this position right here. Anytime I'm here in this situation, I hip heist towards his head, this way. Now watch and see if he can get away by flipping his hips when I do this. I catch him on his back. Again, do not roll towards his hips or his feet. You'll end up in that position. When you get your opponent in this situation, I'm going to hip heist, basic skill, but I'm going to hip heist towards his head, not towards his hips. Here. From here, now I'm going to bring this hand over the top. This time I'm going to take the control point down again, hit a double leg. I've stopped in this position right here, and this guy is really a tough man and clings on me tough, and at the same time he reaches over with the other hand and grabs one of my ankles. From this position right here, what I'm going to do is set on his hand, right there. I want him to try to pull his hand out. I have all the weight on his hand here. I don't have to reach back and grab this with either hand because I don't want to lose track of these hips. If I were to let go here and try to reach back, grab this, his hips are free now and he can move to the outside and get around me. So I want to make sure that I keep control of his hips. At the same time, he can grab me with both hands on my ankles. It doesn't make any difference. From this position, he's done a good job of countering. I immediately set on one of them. So it's trapped. I don't want to let go of the hips here. I want to keep them. From this position now, again, I'm going to go back in this direction. Here. I'm posted. I'm in a crab walk, hip heist position. One of our basic skills. Again, I don't hip heist towards the hips. I hip heist towards his head. Here. In this position. We'll do it one more time. Partner's coming over. Grabbing my ankles after I've gotten in the double leg position. I immediately set on it. I just set right on it, put all my weight on that hand. I continue the motion back. I'm in a crab walk position here, and I'm going to hip heist towards his head. And as I do this, I want him to try to turn. Ready? Go. I'm going to catch him right here. Got to have those quick hips. You got to work that basic skill on that hip heist every day.
In this variation, Zeke Jones' Romanian opponent is locked in the crotch as Zeke tries to control the arm and dump him back. He immediately hip heists to the head, but his opponent rolls free. Back exposure for Zeke, 0 for his opponent.
We talked about lifting in our basic skills. Lifting can be a very effective finish for a double leg takedown, as can be seen from the following examples.